Here are 10 winemaking facts and terms you're sure to come across as you explore the world of wine. What happens when grape juice undergoes alcoholic fermentation? The sugar in the grape juice is consumed by yeast, which produces alcohol and carbon dioxide as byproducts. In winemaking, there are two kinds of fermentation. The first being alcoholic fermentation, which is done to transform the grape juice into essentially wine. The second is malolactic fermentation, or more accurately, conversion, which is done for almost all red wines and some white wines like Chardonnay, to give them a fuller body and smoother mouthfeel. What microorganism carries out alcoholic fermentation in wine? Yeasts. So these are single-celled organisms that belong to the fungus kingdom. They occur naturally on most living surfaces, but winemakers do use a specific species of yeast, Saccharomyces cerevisiae, in order to control the rate of fermentation, as well as the resultant flavors of the wine. Alcoholic fermentation stops when the yeasts have eaten all the sugar, leaving behind a dry wine. Dry meaning there is no or very little residual sugar. What are the 5 main steps taken to craft white wines? Harvesting, pressing, alcoholic fermentation, maturation, and packaging or bottling. First, the grapes are harvested and pressed to gently separate the juice from the skins and seeds. The juice is then left to ferment in most often steel tanks, during which time the sugar is converted to alcohol by the yeasts. Once the wine has achieved the flavors and aromas designed by the winemaker, it is left to settle for a short while, usually just a few months, and then packaged in bottles. Some white wines like Chardonnay and Viognier undergo more complex steps like malolactic conversion and aging in oak barrels, but the main steps I just described cover the basic winemaking process for most unwooded white wines. What is malolactic conversion? The transformation of tart malic acid, which is the same acid you taste in an unripe apple, into softer, creamier lactic acid, which is the same acid in yogurt. Malolactic conversion, which is carried out by lactic acid bacteria, is introduced into the winemaking process of almost all still red wines and some white wines in order to achieve a fuller, rounder mouthfeel. It also imparts buttery flavors to the wine, so think of those big, voluptuous Chardonnays from Napa Valley or Côte de Beaune in France. Fun fact, malolactic conversion is oftentimes referred to as malolactic fermentation, but since bacteria is used and not yeast cells, it strictly speaking isn't a fermentation. The more accurate term is conversion, a conversion of malic acid to lactic acid. What are the 7 main steps taken to craft red wines? Harvesting, crushing, alcoholic fermentation, malolactic conversion, pressing, storage or maturation, and packaging. First, the grapes are harvested and crushed to liberate the juice while retaining the skins and seeds in the mix, which is where the color and tannin in red wine comes from. After alcoholic fermentation, the winemaker inoculates the wine with a special kind of bacteria which begins malolactic conversion. This is a standard practice in the production of red wine because it enhances the body and flavor persistence of the wine, while the creamier, softer textures balance out the red's naturally heavier tannins. Then the wine is pressed to squeeze the remaining skins and seeds of their final juices. The more thoroughly they are pressed, the richer the color of the resultant wine and the heavier the tannins will be. Finally, the red wine will be left to mature in usually oak barrels before being bottled 12 to 24 months later. Oftentimes, the bottles themselves will be left to further mature for 12 to 36 months, and sometimes even longer, depending on the vision of the winemaker. You can learn so much more about winemaking by studying more flashcards like these in the Brainscape app, which uses spaced repetition to help you learn as fast as humanly possible in whatever spare time you have in your day, even if it's just 5 minutes. All right, let's get back to it. What is meant by the term residual sugar in winemaking? Residual sugar is the natural sugar like fructose and glucose that remains in a wine after it has undergone fermentation. A wine with little to no residual sugar will taste dry, while a wine with some residual sugar can be off-dry to sweet, depending on the amount of sugar remaining after fermentation. What kind of vessels are commonly used to ferment wines? Oak barrels, which impart certain flavors and textures to the wine, and inert vessels like stainless steel or concrete tanks, which don't impart any flavors to the wine. Why are some wines fermented in oak barrels? Oak barrels impart woody, toasty, and spiced flavors to the wine like caramel, clove, baking spice, and butterscotch. Additionally, barrels encourage flavor development because as airtight as a barrel can seem, the wood itself allows oxygen to very slowly percolate into the wine, causing oxidation and the development of flavor. On the other hand, aromatic white wines like Sauvignon Blanc, Riesling, and Pinot Grigio or Gris are most often made in steel tanks because the oak would just overpower the lovely fruity and floral aromas. What are lees, and how do winemakers use them to enhance a wine? So the lees are dead yeast cells that fall to the bottom of a vessel after fermentation. They're filtered out before bottling, but if a wine is left to mature on the lees, they add a creamy, rounded texture, richer body, and bread-like flavors to the wine. In fact, allowing a wine to mature on the lees is an important step in the traditional méthode champenoise, which is why champagne and other sparkling wines made in this style deliver delicious, rich aromas of brioche on the nose. What are the two most common ways of making rosé? Short maceration and blending. So short maceration is where the grape skins are in contact with the juice for only a few hours, and so only the desired amount of color and tannin is extracted from them. The resultant pink juice is then drained from the skins and fermented at a temperature usually used for white winemaking. Blending, on the other hand, is where a fully made red wine and white wine are combined to produce a rosé. This technique is permitted in most countries except for parts of the European Union.
That's the end of your 10 flashcard study round. You can find hundreds more questions like these in Brainscape's collection of wine appreciation flashcards, or in our comprehensive flashcard collections for the WSET and Court of Master Sommelier exams. And of course, keep listening to the rest of this hands-free playlist to massively level up your wine knowledge.